Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Our next presentation is called Incident, How to Bounce High, and it is presented by Alexei Novikov, Director of the Expert Security Center of Positive Technologies. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. My name is Alexei Novikov, and this presentation is dedicated to threat intelligence. For me, threat intelligence is about making decisions. It's about what we do on the strategic and tactical level on your day-to-day basis and what to be done. And the goal of threat intelligence, of all these activities, is to identify an incident, and if an incident happens, to do everything they don't happen, and if it happens, to react to this incident properly and to localize it, to liquidate it, and not to make it repeat. So I'd like to talk about incidents and how we live and work with them. What is an expert security center? It is a department within our company that deals with all the matters that have to do with incidents. We investigate incidents. We do over 50 investigations per year. We track various groups that work in Russia and abroad. We do track hunting, and we try to prevent these incidents from happening for companies. What is happening in the world with incidents? The fact is that the number is growing every year, and the dynamics for unique incidents is growing, and it has grown by 11% in the first quarter of 2019 compared to the same period in 2018. The budget for preventing incidents and eliminating incidents is also growing. Incidents can be divided into three categories: boring incidents, so-called average incidents, and the incidents that are really interesting. And this distributions changes every year, but the numbers are more or less the same. There is a number of boring incidents, those average incidents, and some very interesting, unique incidents, and unfortunately the number is growing. What does it mean? What do I mean by boring incidents? These irregular incidents that happen because of some basic flaws in infrastructure. When somebody in the perimeter would, leave a default password, or it was compromised, or they haven't changed the password, or there are vulnerabilities in applications or services, or information protection system doesn't work well enough, or there are threats that have to do with mass mailing. These incidents, however, have a number of characteristics that make them different from the rest. Well, first of all, they happen very, very fast. Once there's a vulnerability in the perimeter, it takes 2 or 3 days. They use it automatically. They don't do it manually. There's an offer from a vendor, a supplier, or research, and they study. They publish a concept that exploit, and after that, in 2 or 3 days, they start using this exploit in their malware attacks, and they compromise organizations through this exploit. It happens almost every month. If we take Confluence vulnerabilities or WebDrivers vulnerabilities, you have new PO exploit gets to public domain, and public tools are made, publicly available tools are used, and organizations can actually protect themselves. Boring incidents During boring incidents, only a small number of hosts are compromised. Only the hosts that are susceptible to this vulnerability, and the criminal in an automated regime continues to do that. For example, a network would exploit a vulnerability to install malware that would initiate DDoS attacks and would be managed in a targeted way. How does business react to such incidents? Business, unfortunately, is ignoring such threats. If they are, reminded by a vendor about the vulnerability, or the company would be informed about this critical vulnerability, they need to patch it, or and nobody actually reacts to that. And then they have information that this vulnerability is now being exploited and used in an automated regime. And unfortunately, there are still companies that would ignore such calls from the community of vendors, and these incidents do happen. It takes very long time to identify those incidents because the damages are not high and they might be ignored for years. A hacked host can DDoS other organizations and serve as a link, be used as a VPN service for years. But once these incidents are identified, since they're easy and you understand quickly why it happened, they start finding scapegoats. They want to find criminals, to find someone within the organization. But often, since these incidents are automated and they're produced by bot networks with no handwork, with no manual tools applied, you can only find the one to blame only after a very long period of time involving the community and teams and companies. Your average incidents are very similar to boring incidents, at least in my opinion, but they have some differences. Well, first difference is that attackers act manually. They use the same, publicly accessible functionality. They quickly compromise the infrastructure, but they use these tools manually. So when the attacker uses this toolkit manually, they understand where they get to. And when they understand why this or that organization might be interesting for them, how they can monetize their attacks, they compromise the whole infrastructure. If you remember this Confluence vulnerability, when it is exploited manually, an attacker found a company, realized it works with online services, provides online services. So the attacker compromised the whole infrastructure and understood that he could actually profit from this incident through blackmailing, by blocking companies' access to infrastructure, because business would stop. So on one night, this attacker encrypted the key servers. It took him about a week to understand which are the key servers. He encrypted those servers and would ask for ransom. And he used very usual, very regular encryptors. What does business do? Business basically does the same. The only difference is that at this stage, when the attacker is working manually, it is worth addressing law enforcement bodies, asking them to find the attacker in terms of further criminal case. Because when you do it manually, and attackers are human beings and they make mistakes. So if they make mistakes or do something wrong, you might try to find them. and it makes it more possible to find them. What I understand as interesting attacks are APT attacks with multiple stages, and they're always successful. They lead to incidents.
This is where the target is a specific company or a specific industry or specific users. These attacks are very well planned and well organized. These are the incidents that I think are the most interesting. Question to the audience. Who of you think that they can be targeted for an APT attack? Do you think this threat is relevant for you? About 5 of you. Who is here representing credit and financial institutions? 3. 3 people in the audience. Why did I ask about the credit and finance industry? Everyone today tried to defend from the group that is active in the credit and finance sector. The number of target attacks, target incidents is growing year after year. In 2018, according to our information, every other incident was a targeted incident. In Q1 2019, they accounted for 43% of incidents. We think the number is going to grow. Why are APT groups so interesting? We've recently published a report on the Taskmasters group. They compromised an organization to obtain information. They had been hiding in one of the organizations for 8 years. In 75% of cases, they had full control over the infrastructure. And what's most interesting is that after the organizations localized incidents, took measures to localize incidents and to investigate them, in one of the organizations, 5 months after, the criminals tried to infiltrate the system again. They used a different tactic, but their interest remained, and they tried to hack into the organization once again. This is a challenge for us, for those who are trying to deal with these incidents and to remediate them. Who can be a target of such targeted attacks? First and foremost, organizations in credit and financial sector, or organizations that have a lot of money on their accounts, because this money can be stolen, and criminals understand who has a lot of money to steal. So this monetary motivation is key. Another motivation is data. If an organization has interesting data or data about strategic plans of industry development, or data about interesting international events, there is a number of organizations, of groups that are trying to collect these data. There is also a group of organizations that could be targeted for such attacks, a separate category. Such organizations don't always realize that they can be targeted. This group includes partners, vendors, or providers, or suppliers who, in one way or another, are involved with organizations that have money or have data. Example, Taskmaster. In order to hack the organization for the second time, the criminals used as an intermediary a supplier of polygraphic solutions. And that served as a partner or as a supplier. There was another case where we discovered that criminals, in order to perform their attack, the previous speaker also mentioned supply chain attacks, so these criminals used providers, because a provider has access to the infrastructure and has the opportunity to provide resources, and by compromising the provider, you can gain access to the organization. Sometimes vendors are compromised, and software providers can also be compromised. It's done to use the infrastructure of such a vendor or a provider to attack specific organizations. We've investigated such cases. An organization can be targeted for an APT attack if it employs a new and interesting specialist. This information is analyzed before the attack, and the criminals try to attack not just an organization, but also sometimes a specific employee. They attack the electronic mail of such employees, or the working laptop of this employee. And if this employee starts checking personal emails while at the workplace, it can really make the work more difficult for the cybersecurity team. Sometimes cybercriminals don't keep up with the updates in organization and keep attacking it even after the benefit is all gone. Why are these attacks interesting? Cybercriminals focus on obtaining the most control of over the infrastructure and being able to stay in that infrastructure for as long as possible. If such incidents need to be localized, we can't just look at the symptoms. We also need to fully investigate the incident and understand what was compromised, how it was compromised, what units, what gates were accessed by the criminals, and only then can we plan our response. Since such cybercriminals want to stay within the infrastructure for a long time, they use tools that are very effective in terms of maintaining this presence, long-term presence in the infrastructure. There were cases where criminals stayed in the infrastructure to read emails of cybersecurity team, and they knew what kinds of cybersecurity measures would be piloted and applied. And with this information, they adjusted their toolkit to these new security measures and measures for detecting threats. They used this information to hide from such defense measures. So dealing with these cases is very difficult, but still possible. Why are we now able to investigate such incidents? In order to investigate them successfully, we need to join our forces, we need to work as a team. And unfortunately, our experience tells us that not all companies, not all managers of cybersecurity services, cybersecurity teams, are prepared for working together. Sometimes you come to an organization and say, look, you have an incident, and you get a very negative reaction. Sometimes sometimes I call such cybersecurity teams ostriches because they tend to hide their head in the sand. Even if we're telling them you've been compromised, you are attacking someone with DDoS tools, these are the facts that corroborate it. They say, yes, okay, we'll consider it. They format one machine, they format one tool, but they do nothing about it, and the criminals remain in the infrastructure. They The criminals always have more than one plan. They have plan B, plan C, plan E, etc. And they always have a backup plan to make sure that they can re-access the infrastructure. Sometimes they can get administrator rights to control the domain. The organization may be using remote access, and they can hack into this remote access. The organization detects it and shuts down the remote access. They think that's the end of it, but no, the cybercriminals have plan B. The plan B was that in the perimeter of the organization, they had several backdoors. The organization removed the backdoors after the threat was detected, and everyone thought, that's it, we can feel safe now. But far from it. The partners were also compromised, and the cybercriminals returned via this third-party channel. This constant returning of criminals and their full control over the organization, this requires appropriate response, appropriate investigation. What do businesses do in the face of such incidents? Identifying such attacks takes a long time. Businesses take a long time recognizing such threats, especially when cybercriminals want to obtain data. If money was stolen, this incident is pretty quickly identified and detected. But if the cybercriminal wants data, if cybercriminals collect these data and review them, such incidents might take a long time to detect. When such threats and incidents are alerted about, very few read those reports. Most businesses just overlook or ignore these alerts. Very often they take wrong steps, they take inappropriate measures that only damage the investigation process. For example, they have detected a machine that was targeted, they shut it down, but the cybercriminals have plan B and they target another machine. We had a case where cybercriminals knew which kind of software was going to be launched on which machines, which kinds of utilities were going to be launched. They sent information to their operating center, and they knew at which point they needed to hide, to leave a certain facility, a certain unit. So if cybersecurity teams take wrong steps, take wrong measures, this way they can alert criminals. They can let them know that we've detected your attempts to infiltrate the system and we are after you. This way cybercriminals can find ways to hide. Businesses are trying to establish monitoring processes, either because they know it's time for that, or because they are prompted to do so by regulators, but very few actually monitor threats. Few work with threat intelligence, few try to understand which kinds of tools are being used by criminals. Apart from knowing about the tools and the methods of using these tools by cybercriminals, it's important also to be able to find the traces of these tools in my infrastructure. How is my infrastructure going to respond to measures against those tools? What can we do to counter the toolkit of cybercriminals? What kind of tools do we have? Back to trends. We have a twofold situation here. Cybercriminals are becoming faster, higher, stronger. They take time to really plan out their attacks. They employ new tactics, new exploits. A certain exploit was used in an attack to collect data. Researchers published about it, and just 2 days after, cybercriminals from the credit and financial sector that attack these institutions use this information to develop new tools. In this environment, few businesses can have enough time to prepare their own toolkit to respond to such threats. There is a whole market of cybercriminals that offer various services, and often cybercriminals are not highly skilled, which is why they make mistakes. They make various mistakes that allow us to detect them more effectively. There was an example with a cybercriminal that used a ready-made exploit kit to target vulnerabilities. But the cybercriminal didn't quite understand how that kit should be used and didn't quite understand the logs that they were keeping. They used the kit for one organization to compromise it, for the second organization, third, fourth, fifth. When we investigated this incident at one of the organizations, we looked at the exploit kit and we saw the full log of all the organizations that had previously been targeted by the criminal. He didn't even realize that he was keeping this log, this dossier of all the organizations that he tried to attack. About 40 organizations all around the world, where this cybercriminal was in one way or another involved in criminal attacks, in cyber attacks. What is the defenders team doing? The defenders don't always understand which tools they're using or what a particular toolkit is telling them. And clearly there is a huge shortage of defenders. I'm talking about highly skilled specialists that can take appropriate measures to localize an incident. Unfortunately, we see that there are very few of such defenders. They are in an increasingly higher demand, but we're still experiencing a lack of them. What could be our way out of this situation? How can we effectively combat such threats? We need to join our forces. We cannot survive alone. Criminals have long been using the service model in their attacks, but the defenders do not. They try to deal with these incidents alone. They don't share information about incidents. They don't share technical details. Apart from that, it's important to know your infrastructure. It's hard to protect something that you don't understand. When an organization doesn't know that the Department of Marketing has new business cards on a vulnerable engine, that's wrong. They need to know the in and out of their infrastructure. Additionally, full-scale investigation is also important. It's not enough to respond to the little flags that show up without fully understanding what happened. It's essential to understand the nature of the incident, the type of the incident, whether just 2 or 3 units were compromised, or it's an APT group that is also planning to return to your infrastructure. As they say, training is difficult, but battle is easier. So this training, these exercises are very important, because often when an incident occurs, the organization is at a loss and doesn't understand what to do, where to go, how to respond to this incident.
And the main thing we have to do is we need to build up practical information security and try make this security able to face today's challenges and to see that the things you implement in your organization are able to combat the tactics and the strategies of the criminals who are trying to access your infrastructure. Thank you for your attention. I'm ready to take your questions, if you have any. Mikhail Burlakov. Incident, the word incident was used so many times during your presentation. To describe what an incident is, if we take your presentation, maybe you could give a definition. I'll explain why. We have a classical example. In a supper system, they found a vulnerability on microcontrollers. Microcontrollers were responsible for heat distribution in the house. What this soft did, nobody knew. It was just sitting there. You have a vulnerability, you have an exploit, but do you consider it to be an incident? Well, the definition for an incident, you can take two approaches. We have regulators in various industries that give definitions for incidents. Federal Act number 187, an incident is a breach of your regular these utilities, this PO, did it come from the provider? It's not its function. And when nobody can predict whether it will have an effect on infrastructure. In the credit and finance sector, they see incident as an unsanctioned transaction or transfer of money. Depending on the industry, depending on the specific features and specific environment of an organization, they would have different definitions for incident. Well, money theft would be an incident for everyone, I guess. But as for additional functionality, some might try to classify certain situations as non-incidents. In our practice, if that would be an incident, we'll try to figure out how this software got there, what is it doing, and after the analysis, after the assessment, after we realize what it does, what are its functions, we could classify as a possibility or an incident as such. I would like to know you. My name is Boris. I would like to know your opinion of deception class solutions. What do you think about Honeypot 2.0? What's your stance in terms of what? Whether this solution is used widely and whether it's effective. Before you introduce a new solution to protect information, honeypots, for example, you need to make sure you've did the best you could with the solution you already have. People often try to follow the newest trends, introducing new solutions, and they don't wash their hands before eating, before getting to the table, and they don't follow this regular cyber hygiene. Well, these solutions can identify 1 out of 5 complex cases, but once the criminals are using a simpler functional, and they'll have the same effect. And NotPetya or WannaCry epidemic can only prove that certain solutions never identified these threats. You had an old operational system, no patches, and that made your system vulnerable. If there are no more questions, thank you for your attention.